The tone around Cleveland's quarterback room shifted on day 13 of training camp, and it shifted in a way that's hard to explain away with a single stat line. 2 weeks into camp, this was supposed to be the point where the veteran starts pulling clear. Instead, Shedeur Sanders is still standing right there next to Deshaun Watson, and that's the detail the Browns can no longer treat as a footnote in this competition. Here's what makes this so difficult to call. Watson did not have a bad day. If he had, this entire conversation would be simple. He showed real veteran anticipation on several reps, got rid of the football before pressure fully arrived, and made a handful of throws that only come from a quarterback who has already lived through hundreds of real NFL snaps. According to the numbers tracked after practice, Watson finished 12 for 17, while Shedeur went 13 for 21. On the surface, that reads as Watson with the cleaner percentage. Case closed, right? Except camp evaluation almost never works that cleanly, and anyone who has actually sat through enough training camp practices knows that the box score is usually the least interesting part of the story. A completion percentage does not tell you what kind of throw was even attempted. It does not tell you how tight the coverage was, whether the receiver did his job, whether protection held up, or whether the quarterback was operating in a clean pocket or getting hit as he released. And on day 13, several of Shedeur's incompletions had almost nothing to do with his accuracy. There was a deep shot to Jerry Jeudy that had enough on it to completely flip the tone of the entire day, and instead of becoming the play everybody walked away talking about, it got filed away as just another incompletion because the catch never got finished on the other end. That is football. Receivers are going to drop passes sometimes. But if you are genuinely trying to figure out who played the better practice, you cannot hand every incompletion to the quarterback and call the comparison settled. What stood out more than any single number was how comfortable Shedeur looked attacking the middle of the field. He was not living safely on quick underneath throws or easy completions outside the numbers, the kind of stuff that pads a stat sheet without actually proving anything. He was trusting tight windows, releasing the football into space before his receiver had fully separated from the defender, and letting the timing of the route do the work instead of waiting for something to open up on its own. That is not a small detail. NFL quarterbacks who wait for a receiver to be completely uncovered are already too late, because by the time that window fully opens, the defense has usually already recovered and closed it back down. Anticipation is the real difference between a backup who looks good in shorts during OTAs and a starter who can actually survive NFL speed on Sundays. And when you stack that up against some of the criticism that followed Shedeur out of last season, this is exactly the kind of growth Cleveland should be paying very close attention to right now. Then there is the pocket movement, and honestly this might matter more long-term than any single throw from day 13. One of the recurring critiques of Shedeur heading into this camp was his tendency to drift backward under pressure instead of stepping up into it and trusting his line. That sounds like a minor mechanical footnote, but it is not. When a quarterback keeps fading away from his own protection, he is shortening the distance the pass rusher has to travel and essentially manufacturing pressure that did not need to exist in the first place. His offensive line is building a pocket at a certain depth, expecting him to operate inside it. Drift too far back, and you are walking directly into the exact danger your tackles are trying to protect you from. On day 13, that pattern looked genuinely different. Shedeur stayed on schedule, climbed forward when the pocket started collapsing at the edges, kept his eyes downfield the entire time instead of panicking, and trusted his line to do its job instead of running away from it. Coaches obviously notice explosive plays because those are the ones that get replayed and talked about after practice. But they are watching just as closely for whether a quarterback is making the offensive line's job easier or harder, and whether he actually understands where the pocket is supposed to exist in the first place, not just where it happens to be in the moment. That is where this competition starts getting uncomfortable for Watson, because his single biggest advantage was never supposed to be his arm talent. It was experience. He is supposed to be the guy who processes information faster, reads pressure before it fully develops, and controls the huddle with the kind of calm that only comes from having already seen almost everything the league can throw at him. Shedeur does not need to out-experience a quarterback with Watson's resume overnight. Nobody realistically expects that from a younger player this early in his career. He just needs to keep shrinking that gap, rep by rep, day by day, practice by practice. And what day 13 appeared to show is that the gap keeps getting smaller in exactly the areas that were supposed to protect Watson the most: pocket discipline, pre-snap recognition, handling pressure without unraveling, decision-making when the play is not clean. Those are not flashy categories that show up highlighted on social media. They are the categories that actually decide starting jobs in this league. I want to be fair to Watson here, because his side of this argument is real, and it would be lazy to pretend otherwise just because the bigger conversation keeps drifting towards Shedeur. There were reps on day 13 where pressure arrived almost instantly, and Watson did not flinch at all. He knew exactly where his answer was supposed to go before the rush even got home, got the football out before contact could affect the throw, and trusted his receiver to finish the play even before the route had fully developed downfield. One throw in particular, out toward Tylan Wallace, showed that veteran internal clock working exactly the way it is supposed to. He did not need to see the receiver standing wide open first. He knew the spot, he trusted the timing, and he threw to the spot with confidence. That is what years of live NFL reps buy a quarterback, and it would be a mistake to pretend that advantage does not exist just because the conversation keeps circling back to the rookie. But here is the uncomfortable truth Cleveland now has to sit with. If Watson were the only quarterback on that field showing that kind of poise under duress, this competition would already be over, and we would not even be talking about it 13 days into camp. He is not the only one showing it anymore. Shedeur's pre-snap operation has started to look noticeably sharper too, and that is not a small development. There have now been multiple examples of him getting to the line, identifying exactly what the defense is trying to disguise before the snap, communicating an adjustment to his teammates, and putting the offense into a better situation before the ball is even in his hands. Nobody should pretend he has suddenly mastered pre-snap reads the way a 10-year veteran with a Super Bowl caliber resume has. He has not, and that is not a knock on him. But the direction of that trend line matters just as much as the current size of the gap, and right now that trend line is bending in his direction, week over week. Then camp handed both quarterbacks the kind of situational test that actually tells you something real about how a player might perform when games count. Late in practice, each of them was placed into a 2-minute style drill starting from deep in their own territory with less than a minute showing on the clock. Both offenses managed to move the ball into scoring range, which on its own says something meaningful, because this is far closer to the kind of pressure that actually shows up on Sundays in December. The defense knows a throw is almost certainly coming. The clock is actively working against the offense. Every single decision carries more weight than it would during a relaxed midday walkthrough period. Watson answered that moment the way you would expect a genuine veteran to, staying composed under the artificial urgency and finishing the drive with the kind of calm control that only comes from years of live experience in these exact situations. But Shedeur answered it too, and he did it with a deep completion that instantly changed the entire field position of the drive in one throw. That is the part that should give anyone hoping this decision stays simple a reason to pause. A quarterback who can flip field position with one accurate deep shot is giving his offense a second way to win football games, not just a slow, methodical 10-play drive way. Safeties cannot sit comfortably against that kind of arm. Corners have to respect every blade of grass on the field. So picture the actual position Cleveland finds itself in right now, 13 days into this camp. If you value pure efficiency and a clean, low-risk operation above everything else, Watson still has a legitimate case, and it is not a weak one. If you value explosive upside, visible pocket development, and a young quarterback who is measurably getting more dangerous by the week, Shedeur is making his own case increasingly difficult to wave off or dismiss as small sample size noise. Neither argument has collapsed. Neither side has produced the kind of separation that ends a conversation. That is exactly what makes this so much more complicated than it probably looked at the very start of camp, back when most people assumed Watson's experience would simply take over the quarterback room by now without much resistance. It is also worth pointing out how both quarterbacks have talked about this competition away from the field, because it tells you something about the environment Cleveland has built around this decision. There has been a noticeably even-keeled tone from both sides, a refusal to treat every rep as a referendum on who wins and who loses. That kind of mentality can actually help a coaching staff see clearer football, because neither player is pressing so hard to separate himself that he starts making the kind of forced, low-percentage decisions that usually show up when a competition gets too tense too early. A relaxed quarterback room does not automatically produce a clear winner, but it does tend to produce more honest tape, and honest tape is exactly what Cleveland needs right now if this decision is going to be made on merit instead of narrative. There was a stretch of practice where Shedeur worked the middle of the field against tight coverage and delivered a football through a window that genuinely did not leave much margin for error at all. That is not the kind of rep where a quarterback can afford to play it safe and simply wait for something better to develop. He has to trust the route completely, trust his protection to hold for one more count, and get the ball out with real conviction before that window closes on him. He did exactly that more than once during this practice. And when a young quarterback starts trusting those difficult throws consistently instead of only occasionally on his best days, it changes how a coaching staff has to talk about him behind closed doors, because now he is not just making exciting highlight plays for social media. He is making winning plays that hold up inside the structure of a real NFL offense. What is happening with players like Denzel Boston and Isaiah Bond on the receiving end of some of these throws matters here too. Watching Shedeur step up cleanly in the pocket and thread a football between a defender and his own receiver is not a lucky outcome that happened once and got overhyped. It is the product of a quarterback trusting both his eyes and his ball placement at the exact moment real pressure is bearing down on him from the edge. Even some of the people around the building who were openly critical of him last season have had to acknowledge what they are actually seeing on the practice field in front of them right now. That does not erase every rough edge still left in his game, and there are still rough edges. But it does mean the easy, comfortable narrative, the one where Watson simply outclasses him through pure accumulated experience, does not hold up nearly as cleanly as it did when camp opened 2 weeks ago. I think the most interesting shift happening here is not really about who threw the prettiest single ball on any given rep. It is about where the actual pressure has quietly moved over these 13 days. At the very start of camp, Shedeur was the one who had everything left to prove. He had to show he could handle a full NFL offense, read genuine NFL disguises at full speed, stay disciplined in the pocket under duress, and avoid the kind of careless mistakes that usually follow a younger quarterback around during his first real training camp. Watson, meanwhile, had the contract, the resume, and the built-in expectation that he would simply be the more polished, more finished option from day one. But after everything camp has shown so far, that pressure is no longer sitting entirely on one side of the quarterback room. Now Watson has to prove something too. He has to prove that all of that accumulated experience is still creating a real, tangible, measurable difference on the field. And that is a genuinely different kind of pressure than the one he originally walked into camp carrying. None of this means the starting job should simply hand itself over to Shedeur based on 13 days of camp. It means Cleveland's coaching staff now has to evaluate this entire decision with a level of scrutiny that probably was not expected when camp first opened. Watson still brings real anticipation, veteran command, and the kind of poise that only comes from surviving actual NFL pressure over and over again across a real career. Shedeur keeps answering back with visible growth in exactly the areas people assumed would cleanly separate the two of them from the beginning: pocket movement, pre-snap timing, situational processing, and a genuine willingness to push the football into coverage that a lot of young quarterbacks would instinctively shy away from out of fear. The closer those two arguments get to each other, the harder this entire decision becomes for Cleveland, and the more it starts to feel like 13 days of practice reps alone are not going to be enough to settle something this important. What happens from here probably will not be decided by one more strong practice or one more highlight throw that goes viral for a day. It is going to come down to how each of these two quarterbacks responds once a defense is allowed to fully attack without holding back, who protects the football when protection actually breaks down around him, who Cleveland genuinely trusts on third down when there is no restart button available, and who can actually lead a real 2-minute drive when the outcome of the drive counts for something more than a practice tracker. Those are the exact moments that tend to separate quarterbacks in ways a completion percentage from a Tuesday practice never really could. Right now, all we know for certain after day 13 is this: Deshaun Watson has not been allowed to simply take control of this competition and walk away with it. And every single time it looks like he might finally start pulling ahead for good, Shedeur Sanders answers back with something that keeps this entire race wide open heading into the next stretch of camp.